Office will have that available for anybody who wants to revisit that.
Thank you.
So, let's see, Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve.
Oh, I think, is anyone, Keith, you want to read this in a record?
I don't have to read the title, but I can give, this is very much by way of housekeeping. This is our annual resolution that calls for the municipal election. Oh, and Mr. Sartori does need to declare a voting conflict on this.
That's
and,
correct, so I will not
abstain.
be voting, Mayor.
But the issue this year is due to the familial relationship between Mr. Sartori, who's running for re-election, and the supervisor of elections. We actually had to modify our agreement with the supervisor and request that the county canvassing board appoint an alternate in her place. Originally, when you adopted this ordinance, it was the village clerk. However, the village clerk is not a elector in Palm Beach County, so that will not work. So we are amending the resolution to appoint the village manager's executive assistant, who is a Palm Beach County elector and would be qualified to serve in that capacity. So this is just amending the resolution that the council already adopted in that regard.
Thank you. Council, any comments, questions on this?
Nope.
And then just to have on record, I take public comment now, and there is no public here tonight, yet. All right.
So, Madam Mayor, I make a motion to approve, I believe it's resolution number 1-24 as presented.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and can I get a motion to adjourn the special council meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do you give our clerk just a few seconds to set up
We
for the
didn't even
next
get the
meeting?
vote from Patrick on the, on the resolution.
Aye.
It's a 3-minute meeting.
Be my shortest one
I was saying,
ever.
that might be the quickest one yet.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I will now like to call to order our workshop meeting. It is 6:04 p.m., January 29th, 2024. Mary Ann, can I get roll call?
Mayor Young,
Here.
Vice Mayor Brandon,
Here.
Councilmember Painter,
Here.
Councilmember Sartori,
Here.
Councilmember Bradford.
Here.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda tonight is discussion of an ordinance amending the City Code of Ordinances, Section 74-82, to allow a lien on property for unpaid service charges through magistrate rather than council for our water utility.
Good evening, Marjorie Craig, Utilities Director, and we're looking for some direction on the current process. So the existing ordinance merely says it allows us to lien unpaid service charges, but it does not have a process in the ordinance, and it just says when it's delinquent more than 30 days, it may be foreclosed by the village attorney as provided by law. And there's a bunch of words above that, but basically that's, in a nutshell, that's the sentence that gives the authority to the village attorney. What we're asking for is, can we please add a process, and can we already have a magistrate that is used by the building department. Can we go ahead and just use the magistrate to have hearings for that and have them determine whether we can foreclose or not. And this is not for like every customer that's delinquent. This is, if you look through what I've put here, there's quite a process. And before, you may recall that when we write off the accounts receivable on our dashboard, it is usually 2 to 3 years old. And we have, right now we have, our accounts receivable is right about 60,000 or so. Last year we wrote off about 19,000, and the year before that about 9,000. So, and before we even do that, it goes through quite a process. And we don't even necessarily write it off even at that point. So We've got a draft ordinance that the city attorney's office has drafted and kind of looked through some neighboring municipalities and put something together, and we've talked about it. We send a notice, 30 days, customer doesn't respond, the hearing will take place, we'll notify them at that time when the next hearing is by the magistrate, and then it'll be recorded, and the assessment can earn interest. So the current delinquency process, if you look at the staff memo, you know, we bill in arrears, so that just means that whatever water used, it's billed the month after it's used. And then if your bill is 30 days late, we send a notice, 1% of the outstanding balance, and a charge. And then 60 days late, then we start to initiate the water shut-off process. All of this is very typical of a typical utility system. We contact the customer by phone, you know, we notice them by mail, we call them, we continue to contact the customer, and then the two probably things to think about is an inactive account, where an inactive account is where a customer has notified us that they're moving out and they're moving on. And so, or if another customer sets up an account in an existing address, so then we know they're moving out. And they're sent to our collections contractor after about 6 months if they haven't made payment. So, and then as we've talked about, the bill write-off is considered 2 to 3 years after review of the process. So finance still looks at what we've done through that process, made sure that we've made contact to the customer before we even write it off. Active accounts, and the difference there is really where they've moved out and they haven't notified us, that continues to accrue charges and late fees. And the water's already been shut off. Nobody's living there, and it's accruing fees. So we do have one address right now that has accrued about $8,000. So that's the kind of account that we would be looking to lien the property for the balance of the fees due. So, and then I've listed the delinquency process, including the proposed property lien. So most of the accounts where this happens are renters. For the inactive accounts, they've moved out, we can't find them, and so in some utilities, they don't allow renters to sign up for the bill. They only allow it to go through the owner. We're not suggesting that unless you give us direction in that way, in that case. And that way, the owner is still accountable. So one thing on this particular proposed ordinance, it does say that the owner and the renter are severally, oh gosh, Keith, you might have to say it in the legalese stuff instead of engineerese, separately and together liable for the bills. So that it is stated in the ordinance. So that's one other thing. So with that, I'm looking for some direction. I don't know if you've had a chance to really look at it, digest it, think about it. What does that want to look? What do we want that to look like here in the village, right? So we are a very kind utility. We don't turn people off during the holidays. We don't, but we do have to have some mechanism in place to recover outstanding fees and water use charges. Any questions?
Thank you, Marjorie. Council?
Thank you, Marjorie. I'm fine, giving direction for the magistrate and the lien process and all that. But the part that I would like to see us change is when we don't even start collection efforts for we don't send it to a collection agency for 6 months. A typical financing institution, a bank would, after 90 days, they're trying to repo your car and they're going to shut you down. So have we considered, or is there a reason behind waiting 6 months? I mean, after 90 days, typically we know we've got a deadbeat.
So once we send it to the collection agency, we have I don't think that we get any anything that they collect. I think the collection agency gets all of the money. So I think and there must be a reason, I don't have a good answer for you on that.
Okay,
On why is it 6 months?
okay.
I can see 3 or 4 months. I would not say that that's a whole lot different than I've seen, but I'd have to get back on the details.
Okay, that's for the time. But
It
I
does
just-
seem like a long time.
Yeah, as far as this process goes that we've discussed tonight, I'm fine with that. I think it makes total sense.
I agree with what Rick just said, but I have 3 questions. The part that you just said, Marjorie, about joint and severably liable for the charges between owner and renter, is that in the existing code or the proposed code?
That's in the proposed ordinance that the attorney's office has drafted, and I wanted to bring that up because that was kind of a different concept than what we've done before, but it is common language in an ordinance like this, so it's not.
Well, with that language, I would think that by default gives staff the ability to go after the homeowner. So I don't even know that we need to have another clause that says we can or requires the owner to sign up for the account of a renter. But I would have to leave that to Keith.
Yeah, I can, on that topic, state law has a little piece in it that says if the account is opened in the name of the tenant and the tenant kind of bails on us, we're not allowed to deny a subsequent tenant service because of the previous tenant's bad behavior. That's why we want the accounts to be in the name of the property owner, because then we avoid having that problem where we have an old tenant that has run up a bad bill and then we still have to give service to the new tenant at the same address. The joint and several, it's an attempt to try and put some teeth into keeping the old tenant somewhat liable.
So you're saying that language does not bring the property owner into the loop for payment?
My understanding is that we require the property owner to open the account. Is that?
Here in the village, we don't, but what you said is correct. It would give us some teeth to allow us to go ahead and seek repayment by the property owner.
We may want to have that discussion and change that practice for that purpose, and
Well,
just avoid the issue of having to open a new account for a new tenant, even
And there are some utilities or municipalities within Palm Beach County that require the owner to.
and I don't think it changes what's before the council tonight, but that's a
No.
topic that we can have, or a discussion we can have offline.
So my 3 questions are, is the law clear that the Tequesta can have lien authority outside our village boundaries? I'm assuming it's clear. Maybe not.
So, there's actually a bill in the legislature that's working its way through that would strip us of the ability to impose a surcharge outside of our boundaries anymore. I can't sit here and tell you that that's a crystal clear piece, looking at properties outside of the village. I mean, I think if they owe a debt, we can still record a lien against that property. I think it's different than assessing a surcharge, so.
But adjudication comes before our special magistrate.
And the only other thing I will tell you is that I have used a process very similar to this in another city against a property outside of the municipal boundaries that was in their water service area, and we recorded liens against that property. Now, they were never judicially challenged, but we did do that.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure we're,
And nearly, if I may, that nearly every municipality I can think of in Palm Beach County does serve outside their municipal boundaries. So it's, since this is not, and I'm not an attorney, I don't even play one on TV. I believe that you can put a lien on property
Yeah,
that's
like
not
I
within
said,
your.
I have. I've done that.
Yeah. Because they're still a customer, they still owe you, you still are due that bill.
Second question is, we make reference to bill write-off after 2-3 years. And that's such a big wiggle room. Why don't we just say 2 years? Or, lock it down so that staff knows when that point in time comes, action is taken. That's a question for Marjorie.
So the annual write-off, we'd have to get the finance director in here too, and I can talk to him about it, to Jeff. This was the process in place when I got here. I can't, how do you eat the elephant? Just one bite at a time. We've got a lot going on, so it is something that's bothered me. Is why is it so long? And then, I'm looking at a dashboard and I'm like, oh. So we can discuss that and see if we can get that. I'm really not sure why we're not writing off, more of them, so it's not, right now, $60,000, okay, about 20,000 of that is well, over the holidays, it always goes up after we don't shut people off, so.
So to answer your question, we'll bring it back, we'll look at it,
Yeah.
when we come
Yeah,
back,
we'll look at it.
we'll try to put a date certain on it, 24 months or whatever.
I think the council's goal, I'm not speaking for anybody, but the goal is to get collection, not granting time ad infinitum for people who
Right.
don't pay their bill. Last question is, in this bill collector process that we have, when we contact the bill collector, does that contractor take any action to provide input to the credit bureaus about, as paraphrasing what Rick said, about the deadbeat?
So, my understanding is that it does go against your credit, but I would have to get you a firm answer on that.
Okay.
But it's something that, anytime a credit bureau becomes involved, it's,
I would suggest,
I'm
all for the magistrate, I'm all for faster adjudication, etc. But I would think that as part of that process, the contract of the bill collector should be looked at, the speeding up the process so that, they're up the creek without a paddle much sooner than they are getting away with today. That's just Tom's opinion.
okay.
Going through the process for delinquent bills, let's say a family, especially in this crazy economy that's still not fixed yet, gets a hardship. Do we still do where if they reach out out of good faith, we work something out, or they go like on a payment plan? Do we still kind of do that
Yes.
as partnership? Okay. So that's just, I want to make sure that's just not out the window, because that does happen, and they are trying to do their due diligence and catch up and work it out. Secondly, I think the magistrate is fine. I am personally open to, if we require a homeowner, the property owner, to be in charge of the water account. Because I could see lots of pros and cons on both sides, for the renter and cons for the property owner. However, we do have data and evidence that there have been renters that come and go, and just, it's a free-for-all for them, and that's not fair to the village. Property owner, if they're smart, as a landlord, they'll put that in their rental contract that, if they don't pay bills that gives them also some teeth that they have to go down the eviction process. I see more pros than cons, so I would kind of lean towards that right now. Because also that goes towards our other taxpayers where we are looking at working on our water maintenance and stuff. We're losing a lot of money that we'd be putting towards that. And if we keep losing that, then we just have to keep adding fees to the bills for our residents who are here and committed. So again, I see a lot more pros to having the property owners responsible than letting these renters come and go. Otherwise, it looks good to me.
Councilmember Painter, anything? No. Councilmember Painter?
I'm sorry, did you ask me? Was that for me?
Yep, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I did, but I think just listening to you guys talk through it answered most of my questions. So, I guess the main question I have is, there's really, in the agenda, or in the backup to the agenda, there's the draft ordinance for discussion, then there's the current delinquency, and then there's the third delinquency process, including proposed property lien. Are we trying to decide between the draft ordinance for discussion and then the third option, the delinquency process, including proposed property lien, or are we only considering the draft ordinance for discussion? I was a little confused by that.
So the draft ordinance is for discussion, so it has certain, as a process, and then what I put is the current delinquency process, what we go through, and then the proposed one, I probably should have put the word, well, it says.
Okay.
The second one is with the proposed property lien in there, and I put in bold and italics where the customer or owner would go through the lien process. So just adding that to the process itself. And, whatever feedback, if I can change it or bring it back.
Okay, no, I'm good. I just wanted to make sure I understood exactly what we were looking at to potentially, well, we're not adopting anything, but I just wanted to make sure I understood it all. I'm good, thank you though.
Many of my questions have been covered. I guess the one that hasn't is, have we ever, it's always been in our ordinance, but there wasn't a process for it. Have we ever liened a property? Do we have a history of ever doing that even once?
I've never been asked to record a lien of that sort in my time here.
Okay, so we're assuming no?
As far as utility, wasn't there the one on Cypress? Or is it the one I'm thinking of? Do you remember that house in the village had to sell the house?
And I think that was an extremely old account, and that may have been what motivated the work that got us to where we are tonight to get a better process on the books. But I don't think we actually recorded a lien.
Okay. So it's been on ordinance for a very long time, and we haven't been utilizing it. Not that we want to be leaning properties, of course, right, that's the worst case scenario. So I'm, in favor of, having this in the process. I'm assuming any cost associated with this would be covered by the property owner. Any staff costs there is to, attorney costs, all of that, would that be something that, our taxpayers or the water, users are going to pay for, or would the customer owner that is being liened would have to repay all those costs?
That's a great question. So what we would do is collect all of that information and provide it to the magistrate as a part of the fees and services due, so that we could try to collect any of our time or the cost as a part of the lien process.
If we had to take it to that hearing, much like we do with code enforcement, we collect administrative costs that cover the village's expense of bringing the hearing. I think we would look to do the same thing with these, and recover those administrative costs so that there's not a
yeah, so we're not out the cost
right.
to go through this whole process. But you do have to think about, is it worth, how big is the bill? Is it a couple $100? Is it worth, liening a property? Probably not. But if you want to give direction on that too, like an amount, that's fine too. There just happens to be one that is around $8,000.
But that one is kind of an older account.
It's an older account. It's been around for a number of years, and we know the property's vacant, and we've continued to try to reach out to recover the costs.
But Margie, you know that if we go down the path of making the property owner be responsible for the creation of and the payment of the water bill account, then $200 is not going to stop us from going to lien. You know, if they didn't pay it, they didn't pay it. Why would we wait till it's 500, 1,000, 2,000? Just go. After you've gone through the timeline, they haven't paid it, the property owner still owns it, what's to stop us?
That is accurate.
Right, so why let it just sit there and accrue?
Yeah, why
Just
let
start
it
the
just sit there?
process.
Yeah, just start the ball rolling.
I mean, I hear you, the cost and the worth of,
Mhm.
yeah, I get that, but I
Well-
like sticking to the process.
Yeah, word spreads like wildfire.
Yeah, I think the joint and several liability is gonna fix a lot of these 90-day past due. It won't get that far. I think
Sure.
property owner's gonna take it. I think that's gonna solve a
River
lot of
District
these.
doesn't let it get far.
Just
We would be-
incremental creep, and I think that goes away.
Loxahatchee River District is another utility, they don't let it get that far.
Yeah,
So we wouldn't be the first ones to just hold people accountable. Don't let it sit there for years and.
Well, having your support is tremendous, speaks volumes, so.
So, my opinion is, I think a lot of good points have been brought up tonight. I don't know that we need to see this, at the next council meeting as it's written. I don't know how urgent it is to just add the lien process line item in there. I'm wondering if we just maybe have this on a workshop again, touch the points about, when does it go to collections, the 2 to 3 years for write-offs, the, confirming we can lien outside of municipal boundaries, defining collecting fees and other costs, adding property owners making sure the property owners always tied to the account. So I think there's a handful of things that maybe we could look into, and I don't think it would hurt to have maybe some examples of what other nearby water utilities do. I think it always helps to look at some of our neighbors and see what they're doing to make sure we're being, reasonable and kind of in line.
I think the basic shell of this came from Atlantis's water lien process. It's not exactly the same, but it resembles Atlantis.
Well, what does council think?
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's pretty cut and dry, I think, but there's a lot of open-ended things, so let's let staff get comfortable with it. And I don't think, another delay, another 30 or 60 days till we see it again is gonna stop the process. But I do believe that this joint several liability is gonna stop a lot of the incremental creep will go away, I believe, any new problems coming in forward. So.
I agree with Rick. We've brought up enough things tonight to cause Marjorie and staff and attorney to go back and look at it again and answer all of the questions that arose in this process tonight.
I've said it before on record, and I'll say it again. I just never want to see the village become Lake Worth Utilities. I'm very familiar with that. I love that we try to work with our residents the best we can before we even have to go down that kind of road of doing a lien. Obviously, it is what it is if people don't participate, but we have a lot of good people, and sometimes there's just hard times.
Okay, all right, and for the record, I would usually take public comment now, but there is no public here. So I think, staff, you guys are clear?
Yep.
All right,
Thank
move
you.
on.
Thank you, Marjorie.
Thank you for feedback.
Agenda item 2 is update on land development regulations recommended as part of the Commercial Corridor Master Plan.
Madam Mayor, could I ask a procedural question of him and then ask the same to the council?
Yep.
Lance, as you go through this with us, would you like, if we have comments, would you like to hear them upon each section that you're talking about, or would you like us to hold them to the end and then let you hear all of them?
So I was actually going to ask you that question as well.
Okay,
So,
so council, what's your pleasure?
yeah, we've seen this presentation. I didn't want to go through each slide and kind of, drag this along. I was going to, tailor off of the ones that have changed based off our last meeting. But however way you'd like it to be conducted, it's up to the
Yeah, I
council.
mean, whatever the consensus is, I feel like this is like the 5th time we've gone through this. So, I would prefer to have them run through the presentation and then we can go back on comments, but
It's fine with me.
whatever the consensus is, it's
I'm fine with that.
It's okay, I just wanted to set the table.
for sure. No, it's good. Okay. Yeah, run through it and then we'll drop back with questions.
And go.
So, good evening. For the record, Lance Lilly, Senior Planner with Chinmore & Associates, assisting community development. This is, as the mayor mentioned, maybe the 3rd or 4th or maybe the 5th time that we've been here for this. It's the proposed code text amendment for the commercial corridor based on Treasure Coast's report. So just to start, this all began in 2022. Treasure Coast conducted a 5-day charrette to obtain feedback from the residents. The feedback that was provided by them became the report that you have on the left-hand side. In November 2022, the Village Council adopted said master plan. We had follow-up meetings with Mr. Allen as well as Mr. Dana Little, and then we had several workshops with this council, and previous council. What was discussed was key recommendations, which included district centers, frontage standards, civic open spaces, the measuring of height, drive-through buildings and gas stations, location of parking, primary streets, dark sky night lighting, and green design. So this was the map that they put together. The map was separated into 3 overlay districts, which we have continued that. This looks actually a little bit different from what you saw last month. Yes, December, last month. We still have the same 3 overlay districts, but based on the conversation that we had last month, as well as with the manager and Mr. Hupsch, we've kind of tailored this a little bit better so it's more graphically represented. So just to start, on the top side is the previous overlay that you saw in December. The one to the bottom is the one that we have amended since then. We just kind of curved out the lines a little bit, made them more straight. And also we extended the boundary just a little bit north on Seabrook to incorporate that stop and go gas station. The purpose and intent of this is still the same. However, based on the council meeting that we had, or the council workshop that we had last month, it was discussed that formula businesses should be allowed. And it'd be up to 1,250 square feet, I believe is what was discussed. Everything else is still the same from the previous meeting. This is the existing zoning code. So the 3 zoning districts that are there in that area are C1, C2, and C3. Based on what we had proposed previously, the front setback would be a maximum of 20 feet rather than what was existing there, which was minimum standards, 15, 25, 15. And based on communication that we've had before, this was the table that was proposed in the Treasure Coast plan. So now this is showing the actual frontage standards based on each individual street within that overlay district. And also on the right-hand side, you'll notice that it has the primary and secondary streets based on that overlay. So just for housekeeping purposes, what's formula businesses? We've actually incorporated a definition for formula businesses. It's pretty similar to the formula restaurant. However, we think that it incorporated a lot more businesses outside of restaurants, such as healthcare facilities, medical, dental, retail, personal services, and real estate. And then it includes, uniforms, decor, facade design, signage, color schemes, etc. As I mentioned, it would be permitted for all the overlays that I'm going to go over, but it'd be up to 1,250 square feet. Anything above that would be a special exception use. And then just for consideration from the council, this was discussed that, as these local businesses, as they start to grow, do we want to consider them to be exempt from the formula businesses? Or are they going to also be considered a formula business? Just because as they grow, they might have 3 or 4 or 5 locations, then they would then be subject to these new regulations. So just something to consider. So as I mentioned, for the special exception portion of this, if it does exceed that 1,250 square feet, then they would have criteria. The first criteria is that they'd have to comply with our existing special exception code, which is 78, 363, and 364. So as you know, if you're familiar with the special exception process, an applicant would submit a special exception use, they'd come before council, and council would then grant or deny based on if they've met that criteria. So now this requires them to meet that criteria as well as these additional criteria that are here. That it will not alter the identity of the zoning district, that will contribute to a diverse and appropriate blend of businesses, that will complement the existing businesses in the district and help promote and foster local economic base, be compatible with the existing surroundings, that will preserve the community's character, facade, design, colors will be compatible, as well as the business, corporate, structural elements and signage will be harmonious with the district. So these frontage standards haven't changed since our last meeting. These are the same. Like I mentioned, it'd be a maximum of 20 feet, and then as you go higher, then you have to essentially set the building back a little bit. And then we transition to the US 1 overlay. So as you see on the left-hand side, the US 1 overlay had more so just that little straight line, that little bit of curve. Now we've elaborated and put a little bit more detail into the actual boundaries of this, this map. So this would include the same zoning districts as previous, which is the C2, mixed use, and as I mentioned, it would have the maximum of 20 feet for properties that were east of US 1, and that was based off of Vice Mayor Brandon's, I think it was maybe in July, that you said that you didn't kind of want the tunnel effect and have two on both sides that'd be close to the road. So for the US 1 overlay, this would be the only zoning district that would allow drive-throughs as well as formula restaurants. So drive-throughs would be limited, of course, to US 1 overlay, mixed use and C2 zoning districts. Common drive-throughs are such as gas stations, fast food establishments, and typically in the front. Based on our proposed code, we'd have it that they'd be on the side or the rear of the building and shall be screened from the public. And that'd be kind of the same thing for the fuel station, full-service fuel stations. This was just mentioned just a while ago, which is the permitted uses would be for up to 1,250 square feet for formula businesses. Formula restaurants would be allowed in this overlay, as well as parking in the rear would be essentially required for the properties that are east of US 1. These are the frontage standards. And as you see on the right-hand side, Tequesta Drive and US 1 would be the main primary streets for this. Anything else would be secondary. I'm going to skip this. Just formula businesses is allowed in this as well. Now, formula restaurants. So as I mentioned, formula restaurants would only be permitted in the US 1 overlay. What's the definition of formula restaurant? It's a restaurant that has one of a chain or group of 3 or more restaurants in a nation, which satisfies 2 or 3 of the following criteria. Similar name, trademark, trade name, that it has a standardized menu, limited menu, ingredients, food, beverage preparation, and then the aesthetics.
Anything over 1250 is a special exception, correct?
Yes, okay. It's the same thing throughout, yeah. Frontage standards are the same as previously mentioned. And then this was changed from our last meeting. So previous overlay on the left-hand side, it was strictly kind of that one main street, a little bit of Cypress, not Cypress, but Old Dixie, and then it goes to Tequesta Drive. We've actually expanded that to include almost all of Old Dixie, as well as Tequesta Drive and south of Bridge Road. It even goes and includes Village Boulevard, which was previously mentioned. Frontage standards are the same. Zoning district front yard is the same, which is 25 feet, 15 feet, and then 0 for commercial and 10 feet for residential. So in this overlay, formula restaurants would be prohibited. Formula businesses up to 1250 would be permitted. Anything above that would be a special exception use, which would be subject to the same criteria as I showed before. frontage standards are the same. And then this was changed since the last meeting, which this just shows, based on the road that you're on, what's allowed for the frontage type or frontage standard. Primary streets would be Tequesta Drive, Bridge Road, Old Dixie, Main Street, and Village Boulevard. And anything else would be a secondary street. What are the examples of frontage types? You have shop front, stoops, porches, forecourts, balconies, and then you have arcades. And then what we'd like to see as far as landscaping, the code was beefed up last year for landscaping, and that included more landscape for the landscape buffers. But what we actually are including is civic open space, which you may be familiar with before. So civic open space would essentially require a property to designate a particular area for civic open space. And that would be for essentially the general public and improve pedestrian environment, aesthetic pleasing, and serve as an amenity to the village. So what we're proposing is that new developments or additions of gross floor area of equal to 20% or more of an existing building, that they be required to provide civic open space, which would be equal to about 5% of the total site, and that landscape buffers, if they have one in the front or the side, may be reduced for no greater than 25% on each side. So what's an example of that? And this was actually brought up last time, and I'll show you afterwards what we came up with afterwards. If it's a smaller site, then they'd be required, if they have, give or take, about 11,000 square feet, that they would be required to have about 578 square feet of civic open space. However, if it's a bigger property, such as Village Square, that they be provided to have about 12,000 square feet of civic open space. So if we decide that, a property does not need to, or, that the village doesn't want to require someone to have a civic open space area on their property, they may do a payment in lieu. So what's the payment in lieu? So realistically, if they want to kind of deviate from that civic open space requirement, they would be required to have an assessment provided based on market value, and it would be based on the area that they would have for the civic open space. So let's say, for example, if it's 10,000 square feet that's required, then they would pay the village the market value of that 10,000 square feet, and then the village would allocate that for acquisitions of parks or land or anything to that extent. And the council would consider whether or not this fee in lieu would be the best serve the purposes of the village. And also, I'm going to touch on this shortly, but we also are including a waiver portion of this. So if someone decides that they want to do a waiver, and the waiver is for X square feet or X percentage that they'd like to do, anything that is not included in that waiver, they could do the payment in lieu to pay the rest of that area. So parking in the rear, as we mentioned, we like to encourage parking in the rear, discourage as much parking, surface parking as we can, so they can do shared parking with their neighbor or part of a plaza or whatnot, then we'd encourage that. We'd like to have the facades fronting the roadway rather than be pushed back further. These are just the graphics for rear parking. You have figure 1, which would be the building fronting the 2 primary streets. Figure 2, building fronting primary and secondary. And then figure 3, which would have the building fronting primary streets, secondary streets, and an alleyway. So this was actually included, we wanted to include something pertaining to just plain walls and plain buildings. So we'd have some type of building facade and facade transparency. So what we'd like to include, which is facade transparency, the definition was actually added into this proposed code. And it pertains to the amount of the transparent light and windows that are on like a frontage type or a frontage, street frontage. And then also, it talks about that the glass windows or other approved openings would eliminate this, plain, stark wall. So we're trying to encourage more, aesthetics. So waivers, as I mentioned. So in this particular case, a waiver, which is going to be touched upon, is different from a variance. The waiver would be something that an applicant would request to the village council within a site plan application. And what they would do is that waivers cannot be used for increasing of height, increasing of density or intensity, or it cannot add uses to the to that particular overlay or area. So let's say, for example, I don't know, shopping centers is not allowed for whatever reason in one particular zoning district or overlay. They can't submit a waiver and say, I want to add shopping centers to this overlay. And this would also be required or requested to the village council. So you guys would have some teeth to say, we don't want this waiver, similar to how you have for variances or special exceptions. So what are the differences? So a variance is a relief from the code, similar to a waiver. However, variances are associated with essentially their land hardship. So let's say you have a, I don't know, circular shaped lot or triangular shaped lot, which is different from other lots within the village, and you have a hardship that you can't build your building similar to everyone else, then that would be considered, in a sense, a hardship, a land hardship. And they're typically granted based off of that. Whereas a waiver would be granted, as I mentioned, they're associated usually with like PUDs, and they're for development more so, rather than the actual land, structure, or building. They would run in conjunction with the site plan, and as I mentioned, they wouldn't be able to add any uses, increasing of density, height, intensity, or height. And then both of these applications are required to be approved by elected officials or village council. So what are the next steps? So if this proposed code is sufficient with the village council, then it would move forward to LPA meeting, followed by 2 hearings with this council, and then it would be potentially adopted. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Lance. Council?
Do you want me to go last?
Anyone can go first. It does not matter.
Thank you, Lance.
Whoever wants to talk first.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, in the US 1 corridor,
Yes.
formula restaurants are permitted, but
Yes.
any formula restaurant over 1,250 square, will still have that 1,250
Yes.
special use?
Yes.
Okay. That's my question for now.
Yeah.
I just had one, I don't know if I'm jumping in.
Go
And I
ahead.
apologize, hard to kind of hear everything Lance said on the mic, but I know there was a rationale for the 1,250, but how did we come up with that as the threshold? Was it like based on, you know, the average of, you know, certain commercial spaces within the village, or was that based on a prior or a separate code, or where did that come from again?
Hey, Patrick, it's Rick. I think it came from my suggestion, because our current
okay.
our current code is like 5,000 or 10,000 square feet, and trying to maintain the fabric, and again, not precluding or prohibiting, you know, a formula restaurant, but really having them have that special use approval, just to we can kind of keep our fingers on top of what's coming in and what it looks like and things like that. So more my suggestion.
No, okay.
Yeah.
No, okay, I love it. So the idea is it's low enough, and if we were to look at, you know, the existing spaces within the village, obviously we don't know what could be built or what could be enlarged.
Yeah.
But that we feel that gives us an adequate amount of, I don't want to use the word control, but it would trigger either a variance or a waiver in most situations based on what's currently available in the village, particularly Tequesta Drive.
No waiver.
It'd be a
Yeah,
special.
so no waiver would be granted. Are you saying if it's not allowed in that particular overlay, or are you saying if it exceeds that threshold?
I'm saying, so like like the formula businesses that, if I remember correctly, and I don't have I'm driving, so I don't have the agenda for me, but if it were formula business, not formula restaurants, it's 1,250 square feet or, what was it, if it's 1,250 square feet or more on Tequesta Drive, then they would have to seek a variance. But if it was 1,250 square feet or less or if it's on Tequesta Drive, period, if it's a formula business, they would have to come in for variance.
The way I had it was everything that exceeds 1,250 or above would require special exception use approval. So
Or
it'd be,
special exception, sorry.
yeah, it would require council's approval essentially.
Okay. All right, now, that was my main question. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
Yeah,
Okay.
No, it's quite all right.
Yeah, my intent of that square, it was just to give us a little bit more control. That was the intent, and I just kind of picked a random figure just because thought of what a small house would be, and I thought, I don't know what a typical bay is like in the Publix Plaza or anything like that, but, so I threw that number out because it gives us some control, because before, I think it was 10,000 or 5,000. We didn't see anything. We didn't see it before then. So now at least we can see almost everything that comes in.
Well, that was
Yeah,
one of my
I
questions
love
as
that.
well, that Councilmember Painter brought up. Because I want to make, like, was there assessment in each district to kind of figure out, the average square foot of, leasable space or spaces where maybe this would apply, to make sure it's reasonable to, like you said, give us, make sure we're getting what we want in protecting the village and the fabric of the community and the business, but making sure it's reasonable for each district based on, it's going to change, things can be demolished and rebuilt, but, was there any kind of research done there? And then also, just from a legal standpoint, I don't know if we need to be have a little more, study or backup to make sure those square footages are reasonable, or if it, from a legal standpoint, it doesn't matter.
So we have not done that yet, but we can do that when we bring the code forward for adoption. We'll give some examples of different sizes of local businesses, so you get a feel for what is of a certain size.
We did, and I'll cut into, we did do a little bit of analysis of outside. So just to give you guys some perspective, the Burger King in Jupiter, because I know we were talking a little bit about food and fast food. The Burger King in Jupiter is 3,300 square feet. Burger King in Stewart is 2,800 square feet. The Taco Bell, which is usually the smallest footprint of any fast food, is 2,200 square feet. Wendy's in Jupiter is 2,600 square feet. So we did some analysis of just looking at what potential uses that council may want to have a say of where they go, because they do have drive-throughs and have the impact. So from a small standpoint, as far as going through all of our buildings, and we can do some kind of analysis, I'm sure, before the next. But I think that gives you a little perspective on 1,250 square feet.
I had the same concern that Patrick and Molly brought up. It's in my notes. It's I'm not opposed to the concept, but I do remember saying to Rick when he first brought it up that I wasn't sure 1,250 was the right number. But in that vein, I think what we need to do to be on solid ground, and I tested it today with the C1 zoning district. If you dig deep into the property appraiser's data for a particular property, most of the time you're going to get the square footage of that business. I would think we are in stronger, better standing if, for example, we know the average square footage in C1, average square footage in C2, average square footage in C3, because what would we do if the average is less than 1,250, or what would we do if the average is greater than 1,250? I don't know, but I'm just, at this juncture, I'm just thinking about what would be the proper way to seek the proper number for which special exception is required. So I had that in my notes as well.
My thought, since we're on that particular topic, I like that it's kind of a low number. I'm fine if we want to pull the data, like if we look at our different shopping centers and those overlays, what's the smallest space sizes? Because there are formulas that will get creative and they might come. And for me, we're not saying no if it's going to be larger than 1,250. It just means that the public has to be notified and they need to come talk to their council, and council needs to make the decision on behalf of the people. And that could or could not change the feel fabrication of the village. So for me, I'm okay with it being a low number, because again, council, whoever's up here, would not say no. It's not a flat no. Problem is we get stuck with this code, and it's always it has to be. Why can't it be there to bring that conversation between the person coming in and the council and the people? But I wouldn't mind if we pull what's the smallest space. And then that's another thing. Sometimes they buy couple spaces, knock out the walls. So again, they could come in and say, we're getting this small one, and then turn around. I don't know. I don't like the games, and I don't think that's fair to our people. I'm fine with the small number, because again, it's not saying they can't be here. It's just saying you have to come have a conversation with the village and being transparent. That's kind of where I sit with it right now. What else you got?
You want to hear the rest? You want to? Is it
Oh, I
Rick?
saw
I don't
you.
know if Rick.
No,
is done.
I'm good. I'm good.
I saw you take it. Because it's probably some of the same ones I have.
Let's see. A lot of the comments that are in the backup for the things that we would put for, I'm trying to remember how I wrote it, the things that we list for the requirements for these formula businesses or restaurants, many of the comments look like special exception criteria to me, as opposed to describing what a special exception is. Now, I noted that on your slide you did use the word criteria, but that would probably fall to, Keith will likely look at your list of the way you've written it, and he'll probably say, well, that's more like criteria, and then he will stick it either in a criteria section for that, or put it in section 78-363, I believe.
So it does say for example, formula businesses, and even for formula restaurants, it says formula business, then it says 1251 square feet or more, subject to the following conditions. So that's why we put it as criteria, because they're subject to those conditions, so it's kind of, in a sense, synonymous, but the special exception criteria is its own umbrella. So that's why we put it as the first one of letter A, proposed formula business shall comply with the requirements from Village Code Section 78, 363, and 364, because that's the special exception criteria. So one, they'd have to submit a special exception use, which is already one process that you have to have.
Right.
And then also, when they're submitting that, they would have to answer these criteria to
Right.
you guys and say, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're meeting them from the special exception process and from the formula business process, if that makes sense.
What led me down this path was, when I read it, I said, well, this looks like special exception criteria, a lot of it. And then I went and looked at 78-363, and just in my opinion, the special exception criteria that are standard for today, extremely weak, very weak. Anybody could crawl out of that wet paper bag, I'm just telling you. But keep that in mind. I mean, if even some of the things that we're saying will become special exception criteria for anything over 1250 in a set zoning, it's a lot of it is just subjective, and it could be problematic. So I'm just raising that flag right now for everybody to look and or think about that.
If I can interrupt on that topic, I think I envision, no matter what the size of the formula restaurant or business, they would have to comply with those, aesthetic architectural considerations. So why is it suggested just for one of the businesses or restaurants that falls under the special exception?
So, as you know, when business come in, we do our, DRC, and we review things for aesthetics and whatnot. Once again, this is just more teeth for council. So if council, for whatever reason, doesn't like the aesthetics of it, it gives them the ability, or it gives you guys the ability to say, I'll approve this formula business, formula restaurant, or whatnot. However, you need to change X. So it's just giving you more teeth. We can always amend this based on your direction, but we thought that this would assist council in a sense to, get more teeth on aesthetics.
Yeah, which I think is great. My personal opinion is that it should apply to any formula restaurant and business, not just the ones that have to apply for the special exception, but maybe you have a counter there for me.
I think the only way that you could do that is by forcing them to come to you. I don't know, as staff, I don't know how I'd be able to apply those criteria if someone was just coming in for business tax receipt.
But I mean,
Right.
isn't this the point of the commercial corridor guidelines though, to have these design guidelines, just like we did for Beach Road? Like, why wouldn't it apply?
So, tough question to answer.
The only way I could answer it is realistically, as Jay mentioned, and I get where you're going with this, Mayor. We as staff, unless they're putting a building up tomorrow, the conditions are already there. Like, for example, if they moved into Gallery Square North or something like that, that's already a potentially 1,100 or 1,200 square foot area. We can't tell them to change that facade or change that building because it's already there.
Right.
So, go ahead, sorry.
No, I follow that. So what if it is something that, could we tie it to that if it comes as like a site plan modification or site plan application, that even if they didn't need the special use exception, then those criteria would apply? So could we word it like that? So if we do see it, that criteria would apply? Because yes, I agree with what you're saying. If they go and, where Lighthouse Art Center is, and they go in a tenant space there, Republic's is a tenant space there, they're not gonna alter the facade of their tenant space. But yeah, maybe thinking more, if it's something that we're gonna see, planning and zoning and or council, that we would have the opportunity to implement those, which are kind of, like you said, the eye of the beholder guidelines. We could do that no matter what the size of the formula restaurant or business.
We can look into it.
That actually ties into one of my questions. I wanted to confirm with you, I know at one point in our code, it stated that like neon signs are not allowed in the village. I know backlit signs sometimes, and trademark businesses are allowed to have their corporate design, such as like West Marine. They get to look like West Marine. That shopping center doesn't all, but the rest of them all matchy-matchy. Is that still all in our code?
Yeah, so that's all based on uniform sign code. So, for example, when Village Square or one of those come in, at the site plan process, they have the ability to put together a uniform sign code, and that's approved by council. So that's really tied in with the development order. So, yes, in short,
that
yes.
for me helps guard us from a lot of the formula restaurants. Oftentimes will come in with those kind of aesthetics, and in the window they'll have a lot of like the neons. And I know in the past we had to address that because there were some businesses on Tequesta Drive that were putting neons in the window, and residents are getting upset because they were on all night, and it started to look a little like North Lake. I remember North Lake wording was thrown out a lot, so I just want to make sure that's kind of there. Because for me, that helps with the formula restaurants.
There's no proposed change to the village's sign code based on what we're talking about.
I just want to clarify
Right.
so we all know it's there.
So one comment that I have that's not in my notes was I actually thought that when it came to businesses, we were not going to prohibit or restrain formula businesses anywhere on US 1. That just might have been my mistake, but that's how I thought we had left it. But
And nothing has been prohibited. All we did was we put a threshold as far as the
1250.
yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So it's
Well-
nothing's prohibited. It's just there's a threshold for an applicant to go before council.
Well, I guess the right way to say that, I didn't know there's going to be the 1250 threshold for formula businesses on US 1. But that could be just an oversight on my part.
If council feels that should be changed, we can always change
Yeah,
it.
it's up.
We're just looking for any direction that you could provide us with.
I understand. So, starting on page 1, you have the diagrams where, you show the bird's eye view of the road, the swale, the sidewalk, the property, the setback, et cetera, et cetera. And then that type of diagram goes on throughout the document. I have this question for you. Does what it is that we want get harmed in any way if there's not a swale? Because every picture depicts a swale, but there are places in these overlays that they don't have a swale. So I'm wondering, does it affect the intent of what you desire when there is no swale? I don't know the answer. I'm just throwing it out. And you don't have to answer it this very moment.
The graphic was just showing if, realistically, if there was a swale, but if you notice on the right-hand side, it shows right-of-way in general. So
Yeah.
whether it's a swale or just sidewalks, it's the right-of-way. So we're just kind of depicting what it'd look like, whether it's a swale or just a general right-of-way, and how the building would front said right-of-way.
But if there is a swell, that's the green space today, but if there's no swell, that means there is no green space. You follow
Yes.
me? Yeah,
Yes.
so that's kind of like the point I was making. Okay, in regard to the fee,
Yes.
the civic land requirement, I'm all in favor of the concept, but I really think, and if somebody touched on it, I think somewhere in this tonight, we need to state in the document, I think you verbalized it, but it needs to be in the document that ends up that what the fee that we collect, if we approve a fee in lieu of the donated land or civic land that they construct, what will that money be used for? And in my mind, having dealt with kind of these similar types of things, there needs to be a nexus between the fee and how that fee is used relative to the civic land requirement. So I would suggest that it could be used to enhance or expand an existing civic use, or could be used to enhance or expand village recreation and open space. And to me, if you don't have the nexus, we're going to ultimately lose the battle somewhere along the line.
So right now, letter C says, fees paid in lieu, a dedication shall be used for acquisition and or development of village parks, recreation, and land systems. And then it also says, fees shall not be used for maintenance or operational costs. So it's more so for acquisition of more land, because I guess the rationale is that if we're requiring them to designate a civic open space to be used for the public, the funds that's coming in is supposed to be used to acquire land or create some type of thing.
So we're on the same page then.
That's what it, yeah.
Okay.
It's on letter C.
So in that subject of waivers versus variances, in the mixed-use district, who decides? Planning and Zoning Board or Council approves the project when I say decides?
You're saying just in general? Or?
No, who is the final stopping place that says yay or nay to a development proposal in mixed use? Is
Council.
it the council or is it the P&Z?
Council.
Okay, all right. And then, so this is kind of a general comment, and it's the last
Are
thing.
you still on waivers, or are you moving on from waivers? Because I have a waiver question, if you don't mind.
Go to the waiver.
I have
Okay,
comments
since
too.
we're on, I mean, might as
Two
well
waiver
stay on the
questions.
same
I have comments about
topic.
that too.
I am not sure about the appeals process on the waiver. The way I read it, it just seems like anyone can appeal it, because it says an interested party. So if we're gonna offer an appeal process, I think it needs to be a lot more defined and maybe a little bit more restrictive, because it seems just very, like, anyone can just apply for an appeal, unless I'm reading it wrong.
What page you on?
Page 52 of 96, 5. I could have misinterpreted.
That's going to be a Keith question.
So it says the applicant or any interested party. Interested party is a defined term in state law in Chapter 163, which basically means you've got to have some, you've got to be impacted in a way that's greater than the general public. Maybe you're a neighbor. I mean, that's the most typical example of an interested party, but that term, and maybe what we can do is clarify interested party as defined by section, whatever, Chapter 163, section such and such Florida statutes. But that is a defined term, and that's a commonly used term when you're talking about who has appellate rights in a quasi-judicial land use process.
Okay, so yeah, adding the reference to statute might help. And then, I mean, I guess I'm still on the fence with the appeals process altogether. I mean, do we have anything else in our community development realm that we allow for appeals?
Usually variances are,
So is it-
I mean,
that's the only
strictly
one?
speaking, any quasi-judicial
Yeah.
order can be appealed to the circuit court.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is being appealed to the village council.
That's a, but
Oh, okay, this
that's-
is sort of a,
So yeah,
This
this
is
process,
still in the
this exists
administrative
right now.
Code mistake from Lance and I on that one. We took this from the North Palm Beach waiver section that we'd put in our code there, and the waivers were decided on by the planning commission there, and so they could get appealed to the village council. Good catch. we'll clarify that here.
Okay, so it's
they
not
would
getting appealed to us. I'm like, this just seems a
Yeah,
little,
that,
like, anyone do the,
Yeah, you will be,
We
the
will
final-
amend that.
you will be the final decision-making stop at the administrative level, and then any appeal from
Okay.
here will go to the circuit.
so we'll just fix that language. All right,
yeah,
and
the whole
then.
thing can be stricken, actually. That was my bad.
No problem. And then, just confirming when a waiver would be null and void, because like, and we talked about this, variance travels with the land. So if a new property owner buys that, the variance travels with that. So for the waiver, it's just the project. So would the waiver be null and void if, that building is demolished and a new one built, or would it be null and void if there's like X amount percentage of the buildings remodeled? I mean, how long does that waiver carry for?
That's another great question. I mean, I believe it runs with the development order. Do you agree?
Agreed. So, for example, if a natural disaster destroyed part of the project and they wanted to rebuild the project exactly the way it was pre-natural disaster, in my opinion, that waiver would still be applicable. If they wanted to come in and redevelop the project, or after natural disaster, or why ever it was destroyed or damaged, and they wanted to change it, then the waiver could potentially go away. Kind of depends on what the waiver was for, but generally the waiver should be easier to get than a variance, because it's not based on a non-self-imposed hardship. It's based on council thinks that waiving that provision is in the best interest of the village, as well as the applicant obviously thinks it's in their best interest, and it makes the project a better project.
my concern is the other end of the equation is, while a waiver is easier to get than a variance, I don't want everybody and his brother walking here asking for a waiver. I mean, there ought to be something to make it just, where they just walk right in and ask for it,
And I think the criteria we put in here gives the council a lot of ammunition to make sure that what the waiver, in order to get the waiver, you have to provide some sort of public benefit, right? It specifically says, an applicant requesting a waiver shall demonstrate the waiver provides a public benefit, including by way of example, high-quality architecture, pedestrian amenities, no-cost dedication of right-of-way, construction of public parking, public art. So there's a pretty strict criteria that they have to meet and prove to the council that it's in the public interest to grant that waiver. It's not just, hey, you're asking for this waiver, you can have it.
So you're okay, for example, if they ask for a waiver of X in the code, of point X in the code, if they offset that by improving some of these other things to a higher degree than what we require, that might be a valid,
Yeah, I mean, an example would be if someone wanted to move the building a little bit closer to the street, but provide money to enhance the streetscape right next to it. So instead of providing that landscaping in front of the building on their property, maybe they're paying a significant amount of money to make a beautiful streetscape in the public realm. So there's a lot of instances where we can and you can look at it and say that's a better outcome that the code didn't ponder.
And you'd be vetting it first. It's not like it's just, right, I mean, the community development department will vet these first and work with the property owner before it comes to us to make.
Yeah, and we do, and there's certain things we tend to know how the council will react to certain things, what you were looking for, and can try and attempt to negotiate those things in advance so that they are providing a public benefit, right? If we know that you guys, that the council is really interested in high quality architecture, or enhanced landscaping, when they come in and have pre-application meetings, that's what we can say, hey, hey, you may want this little, relief from this code section here. I think you'd be a lot more successful getting that waiver if you did X, Y, or Z.
And also, with the conceptual presentation that's required, they can also bring their presentation before you, and then you can let them know. They might say, oh, we're going to seek a waiver. Okay, well, now you know what they're kind of looking for. You can give them your feedback on aesthetics or what have you at that time. So we have a lot of, avenues that provides council the ability to provide the developer or applicant with more information through the process.
Okay, and then just, sorry, real quick, because I want to close the loop on when a waiver would be null and void. I think it would be nice to have some kind of description on there, so maybe staff and legal can think about that. Because what if they build a building and we, at the time the waiver made sense, but 2 years later or 3 years later, they add an addition to the building. And so, there's got to be something in there, I think, to define.
I agree with Mayor. It needs to be clarified. And actually, your last comment on if they, in the future, make an addition, that's what makes me nervous about the waiver, this waiver process in general. So with all due respect to my fellow council members, I don't like the waiver at all. To be blunt, I think it's a cop-out. I think most of them are going to come looking for a waiver. And knowing the pattern of what we've seen come through our conceptual, I think a lot of them are going to just want to throw money and solve the problem. So some logistics. In the charrette process, a lot of residents really like the idea of putting a lot of the green space into a civic space rather than having it sprinkled where you really don't see it. That was a big feedback from our actual residents that live here and pay taxes. Secondly, why would they not want civic space? What is the harm in having civic space? I mean, they're already expected to do landscaping, so I don't want to hear, oh, we're adding a little extra lush. Let's throw a fee at this. Secondly, no matter what the fee is, it says in here, it has to be the appraised value shall be based upon the market value of the land in its present state. I mean, we're looking at a value of the piece of civic space. Okay, for me, that's a one-time fee. You just said we can't use it towards maintenance. We know the cost of value of these properties. There was some properties that backed up to some of our parks, and we looked at the value of those. I mean, a one-time fee isn't going to help us purchase those. So I don't see that being a feasible argument. I think that, again, that's just putting money towards something. I kind of see it as how developers throw fees at the school district rather than helping solve some of those problems. They just go, we'll pay our fee. So I have a hard time with this fee process for the waivers. I think if they're in a really bad hardship, they can come ask for a variance, and we can really look at that seriously because maybe there is a real hardship. So I'm actually going to be fully opposed against the waiver at this time.
So I think the waivers and the pay in lieu of are separate things, or?
Pay in lieu. I don't like any of it.
So you don't like either?
I don't like
You
any
don't
of
like
it.
either, okay.
I mean, in the payment in lieu thing, I mean, it's a pretty common thing in other municipalities, which of course doesn't mean we have to do it. But, there's some times where, for example, the property Lance showed, which property was that?
There was Village Square.
Village Square had to provide 12,000 square feet. Someone that's redeveloping that might want to provide 8,000 square feet, and they're still providing some civic space, and they may have an idea for a land acquisition project that's right next door, where they say, hey, rather than us provide this on our property, we'd like to maximize our property and give you money to acquire property next door or provide an enhancement next door. Like, for instance, the property on Cypress, right, where the village wants to do that project. Somebody could, if there was a project near there, prefer to donate into a fund to make that a great facility rather than provide something on their property. So just like the waiver process, that fee in lieu, they have criteria where they have to prove that it's in the public interest and public benefit for it to happen. So this board does not have to approve it, but there may come time where it makes sense. And so if you don't create a little bit of flexibility in the code, then you're handcuffing you're handcuffing applicants, but you're also preventing them from maybe doing something that this board would actually want to have happen.
And I totally get all that. I actually like that there's details in it listed, but at the end of the day, when I look at the actual factual numbers, even that Cypress property, we have been given multiple times how much it would cost to make that beautiful, just landscaping. We're not even talking playgrounds, sidewalks, pathways, whatever. Between the sprinklers and the landscaping, it's not a pretty number. So, I mean, I don't know how this payment in lieu is really going to appeal anything. That's just railroad track property. That's not even a park. So if we even look at the property that's on Tequesta Drive that's been up for sale multiple times, and it comes down, it backs up to one of our easements. It's just west of Cypress. It's on Tequesta Drive.
Yeah.
Let's say Tequesta wanted to buy that. I know, this was like 2 or 3 years ago, that guy was asking like $1 million plus for that. So again, payment in lieu, are we ever even going to hit any kind of goal line to purchase or acquire land? So for me, it's just not feasible. I don't see any.
You'd have to hold it in trust until you're ready to spend it. I mean,
And that could take forever with the way Florida costs are going up. The properties, they're not coming down. We're not going to be spending $200,000 and from a kitty.
Yeah,
I just don't see how it's feasible. I think we're favoring them is how I'm seeing it right now, unfortunately.
But I see we have a parks and open space plan we put in place, last year? When did we, and so we haven't even come up with a way to fund that. So I think, a way to be able to contribute to that, to fund and be able to actually utilize that policy that we have. And I don't think it should be unexpected for us to, set aside some funds towards that policy. So to me, I see a combine of fees we may or may not get with that option and money that the village puts in as well to really finally utilize that plan that we put together last year, which I that was one of our strategic initiatives, wasn't it?
It is, and I fully support that. I don't think we should go down that road to seek funds for it. Do we have any examples, just shot in the dark, of what kind of a fee we would be looking at if someone came in?
I can provide that to you
Even
later on.
just
I don't have
one,
it
so we know if we're
currently.
looking at $100,000 or
It's
less.
5% of the assessed value of the property as determined by the tax assessor.
Right, so,
So
I could sit here and do it, but.
Today it might be, $50,000. Tomorrow it might be $75,000.
And that right there is my point. That would take us forever to sit and save to buy a property to create a park or open space for our residents.
But it could also, you may not buy it, but if we decided to leverage and take a loan to get a piece of property versus a bond issue or something like that, I think $75,000 can go a long way, and I don't even know how much this is going to happen. Anyway, I think giving people the opportunity to request, fee in lieu or waiver, I think, again, it doesn't mean, so it takes a little bit longer in a meeting for us to vet it out,
Right.
or Jay and Lance, vet it out before it even gets to us. I mean, I don't know how much we're talking or anticipating this adding to the workload, but I think having it as an option available to offer to somebody or to allow them to request, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to do any of it.
I know,
So,
and I
giving
again,
the
I
opportunity
like
for
that we
somebody.
have some wording in here. That's where I'm kind of stuck. I like that we have some wording. It gives us part of an argument to have some logistics. I'm just, like Mr. Bradford said, I'm fearful that we might be getting a lot of those. Because why not? They could throw some money at it and call it a day, and they can maximize their property. And I know our village residents don't want that.
Well, if they offer us money to give them a waiver, that'd be called a bribe.
Pay in lieu. I don't like either one. They kind of go hand in hand
But
for me.
notice I said we ought to have the proviso of words that say that used to enhance existing civic and/or recreational open space. So, for example, Constitution Park or Tequesta Park might need a new thingamajig, and you could use $75,000 to provide it, because
Well, that's what I was
Right,
saying,
as
but
long
then
as
he
it's
said
not maintenance. But
Pardon?
an improvement's different from maintenance.
mention that.
yeah, you're
So,
right,
like
that's
the
right.
skate park that we just approved, that's not maintenance, right? Would that be considered an improvement,
You're-
and those funds could go towards
Even if I
that?
said that, you're right, it would be best, based on history, to make it be an improvement.
Yeah, so maybe you could add that language to that, an improvement, that's clear, like
Yeah.
maintenance versus improvements.
Sure. Can I make a suggestion too? I just remembered that we actually added this in because at the last meeting, I believe it was Mr. Bradford, mentioned that it might be onerous to make someone on a small property provide civic open space when that's like, say if you guys look at 312, it's 11,000 square foot property, it'd be a 578 foot civic open space, which is that really going to provide much benefit to the community? And so it might be better that, if 5 of those redevelop, then you get a little bit of money into your recreation fund. So one option that we talked about doing, that we didn't put in the draft code, is you could cap it at a certain acreage. So you could say that only properties under 1 acre or 2 acres can apply for this. So if someone was doing a major redevelopment like Village Square, they are providing that civic open space and that public benefit on their property. So that's an option you could consider as well.
I would be maybe open to that option.
Molly,
I'm not totally.
Did you have more? 'Cause-
I didn't know, and I believe you had one more question,
Yeah.
Councilmember Bradford.
So, first of all, Jay, you said something in some of your comments. You used the term development order. Is that the same thing as I would define as a development agreement? Or are you talking about the permit?
No, the development order would be the document that is generated as a result of you either approving or disapproving a variance or a special exception or a site plan. There's an order
An order.
that actually approves that, the mayor signs that, and that's the official memorialization of the zoning community development approval.
Okay.
And then
just-
it would go to building.
And just
after
to
that.
add on to what Keith said, that also would include your conditions of approval. So if you had a condition of approval, whatever it may be, that would be on the development order, and that would travel with that particular
I
development.
guess my question is leading to this question is, when do we say we need a development agreement? You don't have to answer it tonight. I'm just saying, is there a threshold, or is there, acreage or something?
There's something in the subdivision code, I think, when one is required.
I mean, that typically deals with reserving capacity for water service and what do we call them, ERCs or ERUs?
Water service
equivalent
agreement.
residential units. But typically, the developer's agreement is when you got a brand-new development coming in and they have to reserve capacity for water, and it deals with everything that touches on that.
Yeah,
We don't do those too often.
we just did one last month for
I
Beach
mean,
Road.
I've done it, we do them every now and then,
Yeah,
but they're
so-
not.
I mean, questions on why was it a 5-year agreement versus
Yeah.
10 or cash up front?
Yeah, that was water. Anyway, my last comment is this. Okay, so the land area of the village of Tequesta is rather small. Like what, 2 square miles or something like that? Okay, so we're touching on the mixed-use district, C1, C2, and C3. And we're putting in 3 overlays, which are taking up a large portion of Tequesta. So here's my question. I'm all in favor of what we're trying to do, so don't anybody take it wrong. But would it be cleaner and easier for everyone to understand if we took all of this content that we're talking about and placed that content in the zoning district that we are attempting to cover, mixed use, C1, C2, C3. That's all I'm saying. Might it be easier for the public to read? Might it be, avoid the maps with the hash marks and all? I mean, could it?
So coming in later in the process, I've had similar thoughts too. Like, is there a way to simplify it and make it easier? One of the bigger challenges is that there are multiple zoning districts in each overlay, and some zoning districts are in multiple overlays, so it would be difficult to sync up the US 1 overlay and the Tequesta Drive overlay. So, I mean, Jeremy and I have had conversations about this too. We might be able to, but it's difficult. You're the master.
Lance is smiling.
Yeah, we've looked at it, and then you also get into the problem where, for example, you have the ones that are to the south, right where Bridge Road is, and it's C2. The way that we have it written right now is that US 1 was supposed to be that commercial thoroughfare where we'd have all the formal businesses, formal restaurants, things like that over there. If you start opening it up, and maybe you can put like except for these parcels, but then you're doing a lot of except. Because, for example, we have some C2 that's off of Tequesta Drive, that's right there by Cypress. And then you have some on Bridge Road, and then you have the one that's on Fiesta area. So it's a lot of sparsed out C2 or mixed use or C3, and it becomes a little bit, I guess, confusing in a sense.
Yeah, I will say I'm all for new ideas always, but in my opinion on this one, we've been working on this for a very long time, and I mean, the districts have morphed too, and I think reinventing the wheel at this point might not be the best idea for this specific topic, my opinion.
I just checked with Lance before I mentioned this. The only thing that you could probably do to simplify it is merge the Tequesta Drive overlay and the Village Center overlay into one, because they're pretty similar in how they treat formula businesses and formula restaurants. So there might be a way that we could do that so that, instead of having 3 overlays, you have 2.
Is it just like you can't have trouble seeing because it's a lot of bright colors and there's lines or some going this way? Is that what you're expressing?
No, so imagine you're a conscientious, intelligent resident that's looking at the zoning district where they have a property interest, and they start reading and reading and reading. They think, oh boy, okay, I got this, I know what we got to do. And then the overlay. It says, oh, okay, so most of what I just read is not applicable if it's in the overlay. It's onerous, is all I'm trying to say.
We did sync up, to make that a little more simpler, we did sync up the uses in the different zoning districts, so it referred to the formula businesses and the various regulations in the overlay, because we were afraid that someone would come in and see that and say, oh yeah, I can come and open this business here in the C2, and then they come and get a BTR and we say, oh no, you're in an overlay, you can't do that. So we did try and clarify that, but the actual development regulations that are in the overlay.
So, back in the day, before digital was around, we would take the base map, and then you'd have your clear sheets that go over. Like, literally, you would flip through them. There is a way to do that digitally, where you have the base, and then you click each district. Like, if you want to look at, I don't know, R3, you click on that because your business is in there, and then you click on R3 overlay, and then it'll show you exactly. It would just be a couple clicks as an option, maybe.
Does overlay show up on the property appraisers? In other words, if it says C3 today, would they say /overlay?
That's a good question.
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of.
Yeah. Because usually every year the property appraiser will reach out and they'll ask if there's been any changes to the zoning, and it'll say to the overlay. So if you go on property appraiser, usually will say, for example, C2 is this property. I haven't personally seen it say overlay X.
The good news is it's for commercial and in businesses, mostly not single-family homes, right? So if it was single-family homes, there could be some real challenges there. Usually someone that's opening a commercial business or redeveloping a property is going to have somebody, it could be a real estate attorney or commercial broker that's going to look into things a little bit more than someone who's just buying a single-family home. So ideally, they'd come to us before they're opening a business or do some thorough due diligence and find these things out. Because, it's not uncommon to have overlays. There's certain counties you can look at them and half the county is in an airport overlay or a CRA. So it's not that uncommon to have them all over the place.
Well, and I think you guys did a good job. You added, you updated the zones in the proposed text amendment here, and I think even in the mixed use, you define, like, if there's a conflict, the overlay district override. So I think you did a good job there, but, maybe just triple check and make sure everything is picked up there. But I think it cross-references pretty well, so it's clear to anyone looking at the code that, oh, there's this overlay district, and then if it's here, that overrides what it says here. So I think you did a good job picking that up, but maybe just, like I said, triple check and make sure it's covered.
I don't want to take all the credit for that because you have a great attorney, by the way.
We do. All right, anything else, Mr. Bradford?
No.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
I'm good.
Councilmember Painter? Still with us?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I just have a couple more quick questions. Under the civic open space that's less than 250 square feet, it does allow you to consider, like, artwork, right? I think it's mural, sculpture. So that kind of is almost like art in public places concept. And a lot of municipalities that have that actually have an employee in charge of that. So they're reviewing the artwork, making sure it's acceptable I mean, what's the intent there? Who's gonna approve the artwork, and is there maybe an opportunity to like partner with local artists or, you know, Lighthouse Art Center to have someone review it? Because if we're gonna allow that, there's gotta be some kind of review, and
Yeah.
I'm not in the arts, so I'm not the right person to review.
My personal opinion, I wouldn't use an art organization in the area because they are artists, so they actually have a lot of love for maybe some not appropriate type public statues or sculptures. But again, as an artist, you can appreciate it, but being in a public space, I almost feel like it maybe need to be someone who works for the village to make sure it's appropriate for public
Or a
spaces.
consultant. I mean, I know there's people that do that for other municipalities that they're not employed.
Not that
but
I don't
there's a
love to go to
consultant.
Italy and see those wonderful statues, but
We used to have a community appearance board, but we could give such a function as that to the planning and zoning board if you wanted to,
that's true.
to have a stop.
I think there needs to be some kind of oversight there. Claire?
I agree.
We'll look at what, I know Palm Beach Gardens has a pretty robust public art and public places program. We can look into how they handle it.
Okay, I think Boynton Beach does too. Maybe Wellington as well.
Mhm.
Like a couple.
Just a clarification before you go on, who do you anticipate the owner of this civic property, land now, real property, who will that be?
The civic open space?
Yeah.
They would have to maintain it as part of their development order typically.
So it's remain their land?
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, there's nuances that go with that. So, I'm not gonna talk about them right now, I'll keep quiet.
And if we're gonna go the art route, and Rick was at the league meeting, I reported on a case regarding government speech. Let's talk about art and government speech and First Amendment stuff. We need to make sure that we have that covered if we put any of that stuff in our code.
Okay, and then, can you remind me there was streetscapes recommended in the master plan. How are we addressing that, or how are we I mean, you kind of alluded to it with the civic open space. I mean, is there another way to kind of maybe make that some kind of benefit? Like, hey, property owner, if you enhance your streetscape, you know, to, like our plan shows, obviously, we all know it's not gonna be exact, right? It's a guideline, like, just, it needs to be addressed somehow. I don't want that to just fade away, because it's really important to us.
And I believe Vice Mayor brought that up at the last meeting, and we looked into it and talked to Keith if we could actually mandate them to do the streetscape for us while they're redeveloping properties, which I believe, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said you're not able to mandate someone do that, but that's where the waiver process could come in, where we say, hey, if you're gonna ask these waivers, we have this landscape project for Old Dixie, we'd recommend you implement this if you want to get your waiver granted.
That's where those things would absolutely be brought to bear. Yes.
Yeah.
Could we make it so that if they are taking the position that they want to donate money in lieu of land for civic space, that it could also go for streetscapes as well as recreation open space, et cetera?
I think we put that in there.
Yeah, I think as long as it's for improvements again and not maintenance, I don't think that would be a problem.
Okay. That'd be a good one to add in there too.
Okay, and then you had a recommendation for us to consider about
Yes.
exempting Palm Beach County or Martin County originated businesses.
Yes.
My gut is we should probably keep it even across the board, but I think maybe council can give them feedback on that, if we should include that or drop it off.
I'm not clear on what you're suggesting,
So in the
Marlon.
presentation, one of the considerations that staff gave to us was to allow businesses originated in Palm Beach County or Martin County to be exempt from the formula business criteria. And so my opinion is no, I think we should keep
No.
it same across the board.
No.
I think that opens up a can of worms.
Someone mentioned to me that Sanibel does that they have a formula business like we're doing, but they exempt businesses that were founded in Sanibel area, and they suggested we, consider it here. I mean, for instance, so I was thinking of like if Blue Line, let's say Blue Line opened three businesses around Palm Beach County and then wanted to come to Tequesta, I mean, I think that's a pretty beloved local business. You know, would we, you know, turn them down if they came in here, or would we want to give them, you know, an opportunity to come in? So,
And I appreciate you bringing the, you know, this for consideration. But I mean, Palm Beach County is massive, and you know, get a little south of here, and there's, you know, businesses that originated that are huge. So I guess maybe
Maybe make it by mile, like, you know, within, because it could be Hope Sound, right? It could be something that's kind of in the greater Tequesta area. So maybe if it's within 10 miles of Tequesta, 5 miles, just a suggestion.
I'm
yeah.
fine with staying away from that. So there is a little business from Hope Sound that's coming into Tequesta, and that's their second location. Again, that's not a big deal for me. I'd rather have them originate here and then go off. And then we could actually take more pride in that. Like, they started here, our residents built their business with them, and then they got to go grow. I don't see it the reverse way. I'd rather have them start here, then go off.
Yeah, it was just for consideration. That's
Yeah,
all.
That's fine.
Okay, so we'll drop it.
Yeah.
No one wants to proceed with that. Okay. I think I just have one more. Thank you for bearing with me. On the zoning text amendment portion, under discontinuance of non-conforming uses, I wasn't clear the highlighted section that's in there about site changes and, you know, after it's vacated, abandoned, or discontinued for a period of 90 consecutive days, then they would have to come in compliance, right? Is that what that's saying? And 'cause then I'm like, well, what about remodels or new construction? It just, the way it reads, and this might be more of a legal question too. So it's under section 78-96.
Yeah, so the reason why we put that under there is just because, for example, if a business for whatever reason is vacated for the 90-day threshold, typically speaking, then like if someone were to come in and they wanted to put the same business there, since it's been discontinued, this is already in the existing code. Since it's already been discontinued, then essentially they can't put that nonconformity there. They have to put a permitted use there. So we wanted to use the overlays for the same type of concept. So if that overlay, or if that particular business that was there was a formula business or what have you, and it discontinued for 90 days, it'd be under the same premises.
So for example, when Park Avenue Grill was on US 1,
Mhm.
and then they vacated and it sat there for quite a while, new business came in. Even let's say the new business that came in was Formula,
Mhm.
they would have to,
Yeah,
Okay.
so they would no longer be able to operate as the previous use. They'd have to be a permitted use or go through the process to become a permitted use, which would be special
No,
exception.
I don't think the example of a renovation that's under a building permit
No.
would be considered a vacate
So they'd be
or an
under permit.
abandonment. They'd be under an active, as long as the
Yes.
building permit remained active.
like they'd have communication, they'd
That
be
would
under.
be, that would not be an abandonment.
Correct.
But
So
otherwise, your example is correct.
Because that did sit there for a while. We
Yes.
have experienced
Yeah.
that
Oh, yeah.
in the village.
So the non-conforming use would kind of apply how it already does, because isn't there something that like a certain dollar amount or percentage like triggers them having to come in conformance? So I guess my question is, if it's in the overlay district, what triggers them? Like, I understand this concept, but what would trigger them having to come into conformance?
From the use perspective, if they're abandoned by more than 90 days. So it's really, it's pretty similar to the existing code. We just wanted to clarify what's in the code.
All right, and my last question is the whole US 1 east side, west side. Is that, I'm kind of envisioning it because I totally understand your tunnel concept. I'm like, okay, well,
Sorry,
one
I
side's
just
all
think
going to be
like
like this,
East
the
Coast,
other
West
side's all
Coast.
going to be like that. I mean, have you seen that before? Is that normal? Because it seems kind of, I mean, I don't know what the right answer is there.
Is the tunnel normal? Because it's
No,
in other
no.
municipalities and you go down, it's just.
No, I understand your tunnel concept,
Yeah.
but then like to
I don't
have
like
like
the tunnel concept.
all one side the same, all the other side the same of one street, like is that gonna look weird too? I don't know.
I wasn't expressing that I want them to be super matchy. I was expressing we don't want them to be super matchy because it is going to feel like you're going down the tunnel. So they have I wanted council to see if we could give them an option. So one could be this way, one could be a little bit further back. Not all
The
of
way
them,
it's
but-
written, and correct me if I'm wrong, like I can't remember, the one side the buildings have to be, close to the street, the other side with the parking hidden and the other side they don't, right?
Correct.
You're gonna have like, so there's, I don't know.
And I don't remember who it
that
was
seems
on
odd, too.
council. I have to go back, but it was brought up because we were getting a lot of feedback about that white building on US 1. And residents definitely don't like the building right there. So I think as a council, we need to be responsible and make sure we don't create a whole block like that.
Well, I think that in one way they've addressed this in the future by the, I forgot the terminology they used.
The tiering.
Well, the tiering.
The
but
step back.
The glass thing.
Yeah, like the faux.
Which I mean, that building does have a bunch of windows and
Yeah, I'm not knocking the
Glazing.
windows or anything. I'm just.
I'm not saying your concept is wrong when I say this, but I think it's unfair to conclude that a setback of less feet than we may have today is unacceptable because we have that blank, mundane wall that we're having to look at on US 1, when in reality it wouldn't even look like that if they had just been required to have the front facade of the building face the primary street. It would have all been a lot better, but it wasn't clear at the time, and that's what we ended up with. But I know what you're trying to accomplish. I just don't know whether having one side be, you know, one setback and another side be a different setback, whether that's gonna be strange.
Well, no, and they have to come in for conceptual. Now that's part of our process and procedures. And part of even looking at criteria for any conceptual is how is it harmonious with the surrounding properties? So I mean, if we end up with a property, let's say these two are right up against the road, if council and village residents don't want a tunnel, we can express to them, would you consider setting back because you're not harmonious? We need to create that's all. I just want to make sure we are not listening to the residents and we don't create a tunnel of buildings. Because we clearly were told by the residents they don't want to live in a tunnel.
Right, maybe you guys can look at that and come up with some other options, because I know on Treasure Coast, you know, they did some conceptuals, and was it Fashion Mall, they had like one building was up front, but there was still some parking, so they kind of had it staggered within that plaza. So maybe take a look at that and see what you can come up with, because, yeah, I see the tunnel concept might not be good, but then having like one side one way and the other side other way could just, I think, look really weird as well.
I completely agree. And I think that there's probably an easier way that we could put some guiding language in the US 1 overlay that attempts to steer people from creating the tunnel effect during the design process. So we'll kick around some ideas and bring some sample language back when we bring the code adoption.
Okay, all right. And Councilmember Painter, just want to check in and see if there's anything else that you'd want to add.
Nope, I've been listening to everything and I have nothing else to add, but agree with all the comments, so I'm good.
Okay, so council, what's the opinion? I know, the next step would be LPA and then council. Do we think we need a workshop it one more time based off what was discussed tonight? I gotta throw it out there.
I only kind of left because I know we've been kind of really going through this thing over and over again. But it's interesting because our residents follow along and then they're getting involved, and again, we can't ignore feedback we get, so it's our job to give it back. I think staff was listening very well. I think council gave a lot of different point of views, little things to maybe tweak. I'd like to see it. I don't want to workshop it again, but I'd like to see the corrections and tweaks and make sure it's what we were expressing.
Well, I think
before it goes
my
for
opinion is,
through.
are you guys clear on the direction tonight? Do we need to revisit anything?
I think we're pretty clear on it. I mean, there's some things that need to be worked out, but we'll have 2 public hearings to work through those. And we'll be able to workshop things through the LPA as well.
That's what I was thinking, because I think we're really close. I'm excited because I like this. When I was reviewing the agenda, I'm like, oh, we're close. So I think it might actually be beneficial to get LPA comment at this point in time. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know that these 2 staff members that are working on this, they come to our meetings, they hear the residents, they see the conceptual processes, they hear all the different feedbacks. I have a feeling, I want to say you guys are really getting a feel. I know you've been here a while, Lance, but I have a feeling you're really getting a feel of what our vibe is here in Tequesta and the residents. I know you hear the word small town charm all the time, but there is a lot to
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah, and also too,
I'd like to do that, Mayor.
final thought is that we can, at first reading, if you guys don't feel comfortable going to second reading, you can also continue making changes, right? So there's a whole nother set of brakes you can put on it.
Are you good if we send it to LPA?
If we send it to LP.
Like,
Yeah,
out
we
of
just
everything
discussed that we think we're very close, staff is clear on the direction, and I think instead of workshopping it again, we're at the point where it might be
Yeah.
good to get LPA's
That's okay.
input. And-
It's okay with me to go to LPA.
Right. Councilmember Painter, you good with that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, all right, and then just for the record, I would usually take public comment now, but there is no public here. All right,
And Mayor, I'm pretty sure we're gonna be okay, but in terms of process and timing, keep in the back of your mind, right now, this ordinance would not require an economic impact statement because it falls under one of the exceptions. However, there is a bill out there this year, Senate Bill 1628, that would eliminate that exception. And if that gets passed, it would require an economic impact statement for this ordinance. As it's drafted right now, the effective date would not be till October 1st, so I think you got plenty of time, but I just want you to keep that in mind, that economic impact statement, if this bill gets signed into law, would trip that after October 1st.
Do you believe that it's likely to be, if it's adopted, it's likely to be effective July 1, 2024?
I'd say right now it's written as October 1st, 2024, so I'm not aware of any discussion to change that, but I did want to at least put it in the back of your minds that is something that could potentially happen.
Well,
that's a
if
good
you
reason to go to LPA instead of workshopping.
Yeah, let's get it to LPA, but if we hear anything weird out of Tallahassee, let's put the pedal to the metal.
I'll keep my eye on that for sure and keep you updated if there are any changes.
Okay, all right, moving on. Agenda item 3, living shoreline presentation and consideration of code updates.
Who's this?
Jay, whenever you guys are ready.
You can pull my presentation's in the, no, but it's in the backup.
Sorry, I think I must have sent Mary Ann the wrong presentation. Right. It's in the backup, though. So, Council, you'll remember this was workshopped with you back in May of 2023 with the Jupiter Inlet District.
Which part do you want me to stop? Because I guess I'm gonna have to just scroll through it.
Oh, jeez.
That's it, right?
No, keep going. This is the other one.
Oh.
There we go. Next slide, please.
It's not a slide now, it's just a presentation, so.
Sorry. All right, so what is a living shoreline? It's a shoreline management practice that provides erosion control benefits, protects, restores, or enhances natural shoreline habitat, and maintains coastal processes through the strategic placement of plants, stones, sandfill, and other structural organic materials. Next slide. And what is shoreline armoring? So this is known as hard infrastructure. So seawalls, bulkheads, retaining walls are placed to separate land and water for protection against erosion. 14% of the U.S. coastline has been armored. That number is much higher in Palm Beach County. You can see that it's between 50 and 75%, and you'll see a later slide that shows how much of the Tequesta area has been hardened. Next one. So one of the problems with shoreline armoring is that it creates a fixed point in relation to rising sea levels, coastal flooding, storm events. So this is a big challenge for resiliency and storm events. One of the biggest issues is loss of habitat due to the abrupt transition from the shoreline to water, and then also seawalls eventually fail. Right, I believe the average life is around somewhere between 30 and 50 years. So where I came from in North Palm Beach, all the seawalls had gotten built right in the 60s and 70s, and were all failing. So we were seeing seawalls coming through nonstop. So good news is Wayne Cameron, our new building official, has seen and inspected tons of seawalls. And I think that is happening a little bit in Tequesta from what I understand, and will probably continue to happen as the village ages a little bit. Next slide. So living shorelines protect shorelines by improving stability and reducing erosion. They're actually a less expensive and sustainable option to seawalls. That's kind of a common misconception. It's something I learned at a class I took recently, and I'll show you some data on that down the road. So not only are they more environmentally good for the world, but they're also cheaper. They provide essential habitat for fish and other animals. They improve water quality and filter stormwater runoff. They create feeding areas for wading birds and encourage seagrass growth and reduce sediments. And of course, can enhance water quality, which is an important issue around here. Next slide. Here's all the benefits of living shorelines compared to traditional erosion control, which would be a bulkhead. So a bulkhead just simply reduces the immediate shoreline erosion and reduces future, whereas a living shoreline does all of the things that you see there. Next slide. So here are the living shoreline types. So you've got a natural shoreline on the top. The second one is a riprap shoreline, which is kind of a partial living shoreline. Riprap still does create some sea life and provide some water quality enhancements. And then the third would just be a seawall. Next slide. So kind of similar to the last one. So this shows what property would look like with no living shoreline. One that's got a partial living shoreline. It's got a little bit of riprap. It's got some mangroves there. And then the other one would be just a pure living shoreline that's all mangrove. Next slide. This kind of highlights the living shorelines and how they support resilient communities. They store carbon, they trap sediments, improve water quality, they're more resilient, and they harden bulkheads. Next slide. So here's kind of a cost comparison per linear foot, showing what green or living shorelines would cost. They can be often quite inexpensive compared to other ones versus armored shorelines where you have revetment, breakwater, bulkhead, and seawall or retaining wall. Next slide. So this one is from it's either Fort Lauderdale or Broward County, where of course they have a lot of canals there. Unfortunately, it's kind of small, but it's got at the top the cost comparison between a living shoreline and a seawall. So you can see that in every instance, there's 4 different kind of property types. In every instance, the living shoreline actually works out to be cheaper than the seawall. Next slide. So our comprehensive plan says that bulkheads and seawalls shall be permitted only to stabilize disturbed shorelines or to replace deteriorated existing bulkheads and seawalls, and that riprap shall be placed at the toe of all replaced bulkheads. But of course, it's kind of ambiguous. It doesn't really define what's a disturbed shoreline. So it would be a difficult staff interpretation if something came up related to that. There's some other policies that say that we should cooperate with other local agencies to protect the resources of the Waxahachie River and Indian River Lagoon by participating in development of estuarine policies that are consistent with present management. Several things about water quality improvements within the comprehensive plan. Next slide. However, the Tequesta Code does not have any regulations regarding bulkhead or seawall construction. We simply defer to any required state or federal permits. The town of Jupiter did recently revise their shoreline stabilization code to require some elements of living shorelines when people are doing shoreline stabilization projects. Next slide. So as you can see, and as you all know, we share the Waxahachie River and the Indian River Lagoon with Jupiter and several areas. So in some ways, it kind of only makes sense to kind of look at their code and mirror it in ways that we can. Next slide. So in 2015, the town of Jupiter adopted new regulations that required some elements of living shorelines to be installed when bulkheads or revetments were replaced. So nothing that they did was mandatory. They're not forcing people to come in and create a living shoreline in their existing property. They're simply requiring them to do enhancements as they're replacing an existing bulkhead or seawall. They also created a shoreline stabilization exception map, which exempts living shorelines requirements and canals due to their narrowness. Next slide. So there's the exception map. Here is a study that shows how much of the Loxahatchee River is bulkheaded or rock or natural. So you can see quite a bit of Tequesta is bulkheaded already, but we do have some existing natural shoreline to hopefully maintain, and some rock as well. Next slide. So Jupiter's code says that existing permitted bulkheads may be replaced provided the location of the new bulkhead is within 18 inches waterward of the existing permitted bulkhead. But it says if the new bulkhead is higher than 3 feet above the elevation of the mean high water line, then 100% of the bulkhead shall be faced with riprap or mangroves. Next slide. So here's some slides that show what bulkheads look like with riprap and mangroves. Next slide. So Jupiter's code for revetment says existing revetments, permitted or unpermitted, may be replaced with a new bulkhead or revetment according to the following regulations, that 100% of the bulkhead shall be faced with riprap or mangroves waterward of the new bulkhead. Shoreline exemption map properties are exempt. It says that an existing revetment with clean materials can be reinforced with riprap, but if you have a dirty revetment that doesn't meet the desired standards, you have to actually remove it and put a completely new revetment in. Next slide. So they're unarmored shorelines code, so these are shorelines that are existing in their natural state. It says that 100% of a new bulkhead or revetment can be replaced with riprap or mangroves. That's one thing that you'll see I'm going to propose here, is that we don't allow people to come in and replace an existing natural shoreline with a bulkhead or with revetment, that we try and find a way to maintain it in its natural state and encourage them to create a living shoreline. Next slide. Oh, here's my code recommendations. So, I think the town of Jupiter has done a lot of work on this. They've really spent a lot of time. They've actually tweaked their code a few times since it's been adopted. But I do think that there's a few things that we could probably do different than them. One thing that I learned is that the requirement they have that you only put riprap and mangroves in when your bulkhead is 3 feet above the mean high water line, they found that people end up just building it at 2 feet 11 inches, so they don't have to put riprap or mangroves in. So there's kind of a tweak or work around their code. So I would recommend that we get rid of that so that there's not that loophole in the code. And then I would also recommend codifying that existing natural shorelines remain natural due to the variety of living shorelines techniques that we've kind of looked at throughout this. The comp plan does kind of have a little bit of ambiguity where it says that you're supposed to keep a natural shoreline natural, but it also says that when it's degraded or at risk of further erosion, that you maybe could put a bulkhead or seawall in. So I think we could probably firm the code up and say that that's not an option. And like Jupiter, we propose excluding canals from our living shorelines regulations. And the next slide shows, so these are the canals within the village. So these would be exempt from these regulations just due to the narrowness. It's just onerous to make people do stuff. And that is the end of my presentation. I forgot to mention we did workshop this with the EAC in December. They generally liked the ideas. Had a few questions when it came time to crafting a code, and they kind of wanted to maybe another bite at the apple to provide some input. But they generally liked the direction that the recommendations were heading down. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Council?
Thanks, Jay. The requirement, the recommendation to keep natural shorelines always to remain natural. What if there's a pressing issue or something? What if just natural erosion, that they start losing their property? I mean, do we want to eliminate that opportunity? Because, yeah, they get, because God, I don't know. I'm trying to think. What if the shoreline just erodes, and now they're losing their backyard, and we're saying, well, it's got to stay normal, it's got to stay natural. Is that?
So It's a great point, and my suggestion would be if the board doesn't want to do that or has a little bit of heartburn about making that a hard and fast rule, you could create some process where the council can grant that. So in North Palm Beach, we had something called a fill permit, and anytime you wanted to extend waterward of an existing seawall, you had to get a fill permit from the village council. There were situations where it made sense. We had people that would come in and fill existing natural shorelines because of erosion issues or because their neighbor had done something on their property that impacted their natural shoreline. But it gave the council, an opportunity to grant that, but at the same time, perhaps the council could say, could work something out where you say, hey, have you considered doing some living shoreline? So
I would love to see us, to have it all be natural living, but I just think to take the ability to stop something from happening would be a concern that I have, and I don't know what the right answer is, but I want them all to be living, but there may be a reason why you need to put up a bulkhead or riprap or something.
Yeah. I think the comp plan language right now that we have is ambiguous, so I would have a hard time enforcing it if someone came in and said, so I'd like to find a way to codify it if we can,
Okay.
or give council an opportunity to grant it based on some criteria, but it's tough at the staff level to make that call if there's really nothing in the code.
Understood.
Rick, are you talking about in an emergency situation, or like say a flood has occurred, or hurricane has come in and they've lost lots of land and they've got ongoing water coming down the...
Yeah, it's like a hurricane came in and washed away everything that was there.
Right.
And took 25 feet of their property. They're like, global warming, climate change, I want to go back out to where it was before, and which they might want to make but somebody might say, you know what, I got to put a seawall up.
Typically what would happen in a case like that in an emergency, they would be allowed through a quick process, probably an emergency permit process, to put sheet pilings in to delineate their property, and then when things settled down, they would be allowed to come back in and put fill in. But this particular hypothetical property owner could also, now that his property's been stabilized, he could also avail himself of riprap and mangroves if he had nothing prior to this event.
Well, and keep in mind that they'd have to get a permit from Army Corps, and so if there was never a wall there and all of a sudden they want a wall, emergency or not, that's a pretty lengthy process, and that would have to get approved by Army Corps as well. You could advise on that. They can't just go, if they have an actual shoreline, they can't just go based off our code and put in a wall there because they have a perceived problem. So there are.
Yeah, I think Army Corps has jurisdiction over the Lake Worth Lagoon, and then I think DEP through the Loxahatchee.
Well, that's it. Just
it's
food for thought.
I think we had to get Army Corps at the boat ramp. I thought Army Corps. We did. Yeah.
Keith, do you know
If it's a structure, usually.
what their jurisdiction
I'd
is?
have to look. I
It's
know off
probably
top
the
of my head,
intercoastal.
I think it's the intercoastal.
Either way, DEP, Army Corps, still they can't just be putting a wall in if there wasn't one there before. There's a lot of studies that need to be done for that. But I agree with you, something maybe more defined, or because I understand what both you were saying.
Leave them hanging out to dry.
No, but I think it's great. I think it's what the community wants, and we should really do everything we can to make sure that our code is, that we're supporting what I think 100% of our residents would want. Let's keep the river clean and safe, and what our EAC is ultimately charged with. I think everybody on that would want that.
So, for me, I think this is a great thing. It's an overdue thing. I think it's obviously in keeping with the Tequesta's comprehensive plan, which kind of says, okay, it's okay to go forward with something like that. I'm okay with the Town of Jupiter code. However, there's things in their code that, that was provided as backup that deal with matters unrelated to bulkheads and shorelines, like, the size of a boat, the size of the dock, whatever ours are and whatever you recommend is okay for me. I'm not pretending to know what our code is, but I wouldn't want to do away with what we have and by suggesting to you that I'm saying that every aspect of that in the backup is applicable to what we should do. I'm also in favor of the exemption for the canal areas, the one on the Country Club and the 2 or 3 streets, whatever they are, in Country Club Point. I think it's great, you know. I've been involved with instances in Palm Beach where the bulkhead is failing, and it was an average of $1,000 a linear foot back then. So I can't imagine
Much
what
more
it is
now.
today. And so we would put, like Par 3 golf course, you may have heard me say this, we put riprap in front of the bulkhead, and then we planted the mangroves, and it's just extended the life, and it's been great for many, it's probably been 25 years since we put those, the riprap and the mangroves in front of the bulkhead. We did put new tiebacks to help extend its life, but that's a much better environmentally conscious way to protect your property, in my opinion. So I'm all for it, basically.
So my first option would be absolutely have anybody go back to living shoreline. You know, and as a native Floridian, and us as council, as elected officials, to help Florida stay alive and maybe go backwards and re-nourish it because it's not getting any better. I think it would be encouraging if we put something in place to try our best to go back to a living shoreline. Is it going to go back perfectly? No. The things I've seen, even like in the Bahamas and the Keys with those bulkheads, they don't do well. And maybe a big part of it is because they don't really absorb wave energy either. So when we get these storms, and we all see they're not getting better, they're just getting more complicated. So I almost wonder, the canal people are different because it's such a narrow path anyways, right? And I've thought about the property line, because just like the beach, it'll change, but they have a property line on their property. So if you measure from the farthest property line, if they ever felt like they were losing their property, I would imagine they could absolutely have a measurement done, a survey, and if it comes back that it's X amount of feet below where your next property line is, they can apply for a fill, readjust. I find that to be a solution. Now, people who in our village are very exposed with wide water areas, most of them have bulkheads, but if they ever get to the point where they have to replace it, I would encourage probably even the middle one with the riprap, only because it's more exposed with the wide water and the boating going by. I would much rather see the mangroves outside of the riprap, because again, for me, that's just beneficial to them. That's just more wave absorption. So, but I get for the properties that are much more exposed to the wider water areas, or the heavier boat traffic, or where the inlet could be, and it comes swirling in with the storm surge and everything. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to letting those residents, with staff's participation, look at having some stronger riprap to help absorb that. But I absolutely support the best we can go back to living shoreline, because really there's no downside really, unless you had damage, and it was just an easy, again, another cop out, just an easy, just close it off. So if you guys think you can pull it off, I'm all for it. Because there's only so many handfuls of our properties that fall in this area.
Councilmember Painter?
Yeah, no, I mean, generally, I'm fully in favor of going towards a living shoreline or some other shore hardening other than a seawall, both from an aesthetic and functionality standpoint. I just think it's much better. The question I had, and I think I knew the answer, but I just want to make sure. So if there was an existing seawall that needed repair, I think pursuant to the Jupiter code that we would be somewhat mirroring, or totally mirroring, they could repair the seawall, but it would still, and effectively put in a new seawall, but they would have to face it with riprap or mangroves waterwork. But the seawall itself could be repaired, or is that completely off the table with adoption of a code like this?
You're absolutely correct. So they can replace it 18 inches waterward of the existing bulkhead, and then they would have to line the exterior of the new seawall or bulkhead with either riprap or mangroves or some combination.
And that would be an absolute requirement under this new code.
Correct.
Okay, no, I like it. I think ultimately it's gonna be better for our waterways, and maybe the people don't realize that now. They're maybe coming from elsewhere, but they will eventually. So I think this is a great step in the right direction.
Patrick, I think you make a great point. I don't think they realize, the ones that are coming that are not familiar with Florida, sea life and waterways.
Yeah. They probably see it as like messy and there's more plants that might have to deal with, or these rocks are going to have to replace. But the reality is, the longevity is probably greater than that. I mean, according to studies, it's greater than that of a seawall or bulkhead. So I love it. I think this is great.
And to that point, when or if we adopt this, we'll try and find some literature that we can hand out to the public to highlight some of these things, so there's kind of an educational component of it, so that people, aren't kicking and screaming when they come in and have to do this.
Yeah, I wonder if Jupiter Inlet District would like partner with us on that to get, the information out, since their pilot project there has been really successful so far, the lighthouse, so
Yeah.
they're a good resource. Everything okay? Yes. What happened? Okay.
I woke her up.
All right, kind of along the lines of what Councilmember Painter was talking about. So, say people replace bulkheads, they have to put riprap and/or mangroves in front of it. I mean, it's gonna probably increase longevity of the bulkhead, but at the end of the day, it's probably still gonna have to be replaced one day. Are we creating any kind of weird implication that when they finally have to replace the bulkhead, but there's all these rules with the mangroves, which I'm not an expert on? I mean, are we creating like a difficult situation there?
That's a fantastic question. I'd have to ask Jupiter about that. I would assume that they've dealt with that. Keith, have you encountered that?
I have not, but that is something we would want to chase for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the seawall life extends significantly when you add the living shoreline outside of it.
Yeah.
So I'll also research what that, because it could be 100 years, right? It could change it from 30 to 50 to 100 years. But I'll do some research on that. That's a great question.
Okay, and then have we consulted with a coastal engineer? I mean, I know we had the engineer, I can't remember who it is, that did the living shoreline for the Dover Ditch, and then I can't remember who Jupiter Inlet District used, but have we consulted with anyone just to make sure that this is in the right direction?
We haven't, but I'm happy to if you would like me to.
Yeah, my opinion is it's a big deal, and I mean, I don't know if that's like we have to get a formal proposal and bring on a consultant to review it, or if it's just up here, you can call someone, and I don't know how that would work and within the realm of what our rules and regulations, but it might be worth it. Or maybe talk to Jupiter, like maybe they did have a coastal engineer review everything.
I did meet a coastal engineer at the Living Shorelines class I took, and she's really excited about it, works at Kimley Horn. I'm happy to pick her brain, because she was very interested when I said that what we were doing. She was interested to learn more about it, so I could just kind of informally pick her brain, but I'll also talk to Jupiter and try and run down some other sources as well.
Okay.
So Molly, are you primarily interested in learning what problems may exist by putting riprap and mangroves in front of an existing bulkhead?
For when you have to replace the bulkhead.
For when you have
Like, are
to?
we creating any kind of issue or difficulty there with the rules and regulations of what you can and can't do to mangroves? So, I'm 100% for it. I'm the one that brought this forward to begin with. So, I am all for this, but I think we just really need to make sure we, cross the T's, dot the I's, make sure we're not creating any difficulties that are unforeseen. And
One possible thing is, and I'll pose it as a question to Jay, and you'll all know what I'm talking about, is can a homeowner trim their mangroves? Like, you showed a photo of I thought it's perfect because you showed a bulkhead going down a body of water, and you could see the riprap, and you could see the mangrove, and the mangroves are trimmed perfectly at the height of the top of the bulkhead. But in order to keep that, periodically, you got to trim the mangroves. So the question is, can Mr. or Mrs. homeowner legally trim mangroves?
I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I believe you have to have a licensed arborist or landscape person do it. I think that Joe Blow can't just go out and do it on his own, but I'll confirm that as well.
Yeah, there may be stipulations, but generally, yes. They're allowed to do certain maintenance on their mangroves.
Yeah, we talked about that when we did the variance for sea glass for their dock across, the street.
Yeah.
And from what I remember, that was something that we made a requirement, but they didn't necessarily need to have a professional. And again, that's why you need to consult the expert. This is not factual. I'm speaking of what I believe to be the case is you can trim X amount, certain there's so there's rules, regulations for that.
Yeah.
So and then I just trimming aside though, I mean when you replace a bulkhead, whether you do a waterside or landslide, it is extremely disruptive. So if there's mangroves there, you're taking mangroves out, period, end of story. So that's what I'm saying. Is there any what's the issue? Any issues we're creating there? You kind of touched on this, the conservation element from the comp plan policy 2.11.8. Would that need revised or revisited with enacting this, or is that just so vague in general, it's okay as written?
I think it depends on what's adopted. So yeah, I mean, if the council wanted to outright prohibit people from converting living shorelines into bulkheads, I think that provision would need to change.
That's what I was thinking.
Right,
We're
but
creating conflict there.
But based on Councilman Sartori's comments, I don't know that the board is open to that idea.
Right. Something just
Which one do I need to look at again?
2.11. Yeah, the first one.
2.11. Okay.
Yeah, depending on where we land, I feel like there could be a conflict, and that might have to be updated. So I guess we'll just track that.
It basically says that a bulkhead and seawall can only be permitted to stabilize a disturbed shoreline or to replace an existing one. So if someone had a natural shoreline that was not disturbed in any way, they would not be able to put in a bulkhead or seawall under that code.
Well, with the
But again, stabilizing a disturbed shoreline, I mean, that's subject to all kinds of interpretation.
I think probably just making sure you'll probably advise on that, making sure wherever we land, we're covered.
Absolutely.
And do we have, I don't believe we do, maybe we do we have a top of wall or cap elevation requirement in our code?
We do not.
So is that that's FEMA or DEP or Army Corps? Who dictates that?
I do not know that answer because I'm used to having it in my code in North Palm Beach.
Yeah,
and
I know
Jupiter
other
Jupiter has it and other
municipalities
municipalities don't. So that's also something I wanted to raise in future meetings with you guys is do you want us to create standards for bulkheads and seawalls? Because right now there is none in the code.
Yeah, I would say yes, but because I'm used to municipalities, and especially down in Broward too, it's in the municipalities code.
Yeah.
Typically, so because when Jupiter's that loophole, I was like, why would you lower your seawall? What? Even with lower living shoreline, and then you're actually putting less of a living shoreline for lower seawall. That makes no sense at all to me. So you're just allowing that water to come on in. So I think maybe separate efforts, but I mean, whatever council.
I guess I'm just
thinks
surprised
should.
we don't have any.
I was very surprised when I was looking at the code the first
It's a
time.
little mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Especially with just storm precautions and stuff. It's really.
Well, with sea level rise and more watercraft in the river, I would think that it behooves us to do exactly what you're thinking about doing.
Yeah. And if you want in North Palm Beach, we hired a consultant to craft that code, and they based it on future sea level rise projections. for the seawall elevation. So some of that work's already been done if you want to just kind of copy it and mirror it.
I'd be open to it, but it depends upon budget and whatnot, and Jeremy's approval, et cetera.
Could
Why
be
it
no
just-
budget, I could just copy and paste it and.
Oh.
Well, let's read it.
That's,
Well,
you know,
then
you
if
can't beat
we're-
that.
I mean, is that something we could just add to this, and then if we're consulting with the coastal engineer?
Have a look at the size.
I'll bring it back whenever we have a draft of the Living Shorelines Code. I'll bring back the seawall cap height stuff, and we'll keep them separate. So if you decide to, we could maybe roll it into an ordinance and bring them in together, or you can separate them out. But I'll work on drafting something up.
Okay. All right, any other council comments?
You listed in the document, there were, correct me if I'm wrong, but you read, materials being wood, vinyl, and et cetera, but not steel. That wasn't on the list, but it is common to use steel, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, just want to make sure.
So just while we're talking about seawalls, we had a property on the west side of Tequesta where it was even during just the king's tides, it wasn't even a storm. The water came up over the bulkhead seawall, and the property didn't exactly absorb it, but it flooded the back of the property, and the water didn't really have anywhere to go. So if it was a living shoreline, even with big riprap, I mean, eventually it has somewhere to go through the cracks and go to, and then your tides during storms would go up and down. But the problem was, once it went up over, it had nowhere to go other than just to sit and wait till absorbed into the grass.
Right.
So I've seen that before, and then the water can't get out through the seawall, so it just sits there, which just softened that property.
What's gonna happen no matter what, because the outfalls are backed up. so
I know.
you're
I
not-
just,
I mean, there's
you're
really
just
no fix
limiting
for that.
where it can go to. Is what
Which is why
I'm
we're
saying.
doing our vulnerability assessment, right?
Yes.
It's all tied together.
That's all I know.
All right, any other council comments, questions?
Oh, man.
No, ma'am.
And then, so do you think we need to workshop this one more time, or what?
If you want to, we could bring it back in an ordinance form with the elevation and the bulkhead and seawall stuff, and bring them back together. Or it can go straight to adoption, whatever this board prefers.
I would think we go to LPA ASAP, and then you address anything that you've heard tonight that you think you've got to do or address, and then you come to us with those changes as well as what you gave LPA, as well as anything they said. You bring that to us. I don't know whether it's a workshop or a meeting, but it would then come back to us. But because of that bill that Keith was referring to,
Mhm.
we can't
Gotta get on it.
dilly-dally.
Yeah.
Did I?
No, I'm fine with
Yeah,
that.
I'd be okay with that. And I saw there was a comment that EAC wants to review the ordinance again. I don't know historically if they review ordinances before we see them, but I just don't want that to hold up the process. So like if they have a meeting prior to LPA, great, but I don't want to like miss an LPA meeting to go to EAC.
Absolutely.
Since they are advisory. I fully respect them, okay with them reviewing it, I just don't want it to like delay LPA.
Yeah, and I think that's what we'll do. It'll be more of an advisory thing. We'll do it before LPA and mention any suggestions or ideas they have to the LPA.
Perfect. Okay, everyone good with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Painter, you're good? Still there?
You still driving?
No, I think you should.
All right, and for the record,
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm here. My mute button wasn't working, but I am all good.
okay, for the record, I would usually take public comment now, but there is no public. All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Floridians don't
Aye.
come out when it's cold.
Bye, Patrick, thank you.
So I hid your
Bye.
shoe.